Welcome to Big Tent USA, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to give everybody a minute to join. But my name is Julia Eason, and I'm a sophomore at Claremont McKenna College in Los Angeles, and I'm a producer at Big Tent. And I'm delighted to host today's discussion with Lucille Wenegieme, who is the Executive Director of Headcount. Awesome. So at Big Tent USA, we put democracy over partisanship. There are currently 56 days until Election Day. So join us in doing something. If you're nervous about tonight's debate, you can request letters to voters in key states and do a little letter writing while you watch Harris bring her A game on the stage. Or you can check out our Project 2025 page, which explains how the plan will negatively impact you and your family and is already damaging Americans in red states. And use our talking points tool to master the difficult conversations on today's issues. Please share all of this info with your friends and join us to make a difference. And now I am thrilled to introduce you to our guest. Lucille Wenegieme is an executive in the civic engagement and democracy spaces with an eclectic background in political advocacy, communications, fashion, and biomedical science. Her central change philosophy is that democracy has met people where they are, and she focuses on culture as the vehicle to get there. Prior to joining Headcount, Lucille served on the executive team at the Denver Clerk and Recorder's Office, where her team leveraged a $13 million budget to administer elections and provide other essential services. During her tenure, the office launched a citizen-led campaign finance initiative to match local small dollar donations with public funding and implemented a first-of-its-kind marijuana-themed Get Out the Vote campaign. Her career has also included a stint as Vice President of Communications at the National Vote at Home Institute, which helped states and municipalities rapidly scale up their capacity to handle mail-in votes during the 2020 election. Welcome to Big Tent, Lucille.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate being here and being invited. Well, I can go ahead and hop into my presentation here, and I will make sure that y'all have visibility. I'm hoping you all can see screen. Kitty, I see you nodding. Perfect. Okay. So I'm the executive director at Headcount. Thank you so much for the introduction. I've been in this role for about a year. Tomorrow is actually my 1-year anniversary since starting as the executive director. So I'm very excited to be able to essentially ring in my anniversary with you all. Also seeing some friendly faces. Jill, I see you. Got to meet a few folks earlier in the year, and so excited to greet a larger group of you all. So wanted to start with a little bit about Headcount, tell you a little bit about where young people are in general, because that's our focus group, and then a little bit about what we're doing specifically for 2024. So at Headcount, we have been around for 20 years. We celebrated our 20th anniversary this year, and we were really founded as a grassroots volunteer-led organization, and we were founded by a musician and a music fan coming together and saying, what if we organize our community around civics? What would the world be like if the folks in our community and the music community activated in a meaningful way around civic engagement, specifically for young people? And in that time, we've really grown our impact at Headcount. We have registered, in this deck, we have over 1.25 million folks that we have registered. It's actually closer to 1.3 now. We have over 60,000 volunteers nationwide. So that small volunteer group has certainly grown over time. And we provide an extremely essential resource in the civic ecosystem. We have over 1 million young people that access our voting resources every year. And we know that as of 2020, about 78% of the young people that we talk to end up voting, which is about 20% higher than the record national average for young people. So when they're engaging with Headcount, they are engaging meaningfully, and they're making it all the way through to voting on Election Day. So where do we work? For us, we really were born out of the music industry, music culture, music community. And so we tend to focus on that as our primary introduction into culture. So about 2/3 of the events that we do our voter registration activations at in person are at concerts and at music festivals. But we know that culture isn't just in music venues. And so another third of the places that we activate at are community events. We also have a really robust digital program that really came out of our response to the pandemic when venues and sort of music gathering spots were closed. And so we have a really robust and thriving digital infrastructure as well. And so we'll be able to talk a little bit about both. So this is just a small selection of the talented folks that we've gotten to work with. Some of the folks I like to point out here are Janelle Monáe, Sabrina Carpenter, who just recently released a top album, to folks like Samuel L. Jackson. Florence Pugh is one of the highest paid actresses in the world right now. And so we're really able to work with talent because we are that trusted source over the course of 20 years to say, hey, you have this platform. How can you use that to engage young people in a civic way? Especially for musicians, because that history of musicians being plugged in into civic work, that is a relationship that we continue to leverage in service of young people. We know that young people have a transformative experience when they're able to access civics through the lens of one of their favorite people, somebody that they already respect and admire. So we also enjoy really great partners in the corporate and brand space as well that believe in what we do. Over the course of time, we've partnered with sports leagues like the MLB and the NHL, with folks in the music sector like Spotify. We're also partnering with Sirius XM Radio and Pandora this year, consumer product space like Tony's and Ben and Jerry's, as well as media partners like MTV and across the entire Paramount structure. So we have folks in public, private, small, large. We sort of engage everybody at every size to make sure that folks in their sort of broadcast networks, in their commercial communities are also getting engaged in civic life. So a little bit about young people in particular, and this generation of young people that have access to the ballot in 2024. 48.5% of all eligible voters are Gen Z or millennials. So when we're talking about who would be voting, a lot of the times we are talking about young people. If you engage meaningfully in partisan politics, you probably rarely hear about young people in a meaningful way. Candidates only focus on moving the smallest margin of people that they need to get to a win. That is not how civics works, and that is not how we work. We work by moving the entire electorate as meaningfully as possible from non-voters into voters. That is the work that we do. And we know that if that is our mandate, that we have to meaningfully engage young people. Those young people, especially if they start their civic journey while they are still young, will continue that, that journey into the future. The top indicator for whether or not somebody is going to vote is obviously if they're registered, right? If they're eligible and signed up. The second highest indicator is if they have voted before. So if you start that early, you have a lifetime voter rather than trying to convince a voter in their 30s, 40s, 50s, that this should be the first time that they do something after they've already baked their opinions about whether or not the process is useful for them. So 1 in 5 eligible voters is 18 to 29. Again, millennials are not as young as we think of them as being. Millennials are as old as in their early 40s as of 2024. And so 1 in 5 eligible voters are quite young. And so when we're talking about the youngest voters, we are almost exclusively talking about Gen Z. And by the next election, the next presidential election in 2028, we will be talking about Gen Alpha entering the voting pool. 16 million of them will be old enough to vote in their first presidential election. So their 16 million young Americans will be eligible for the first time. Some of those folks will be DACA recipients, for example, or sorry, not DACA recipients, newly naturalized immigrants, as well as just young people who have turned 18 since the last presidential election. So 16 million folks that we are meaningfully engaging with in the democratic process. And 1 in 4 of them identify as being queer, significantly higher than in previous generations. And what we know about queer identity is that oftentimes folks are not publicly identifying with their queer identity. So this number is likely higher because it's only folks who are documented and out and sharing that statistic about themselves. It is also the most diverse voting bloc in history. So 49% of Gen Z are non-white, and 22% of them have at least one immigrant parent. That's a little bit different from millennials. Millennials were more likely to be an immigrant versus having an immigrant parent. So those are two slightly different ways of engaging with an immigrant story, which we know is oftentimes part of a headline, part of various issue bases that people have, excuse me, when it comes to parties and candidates. And another piece that is extremely important for young people is that they're fiercely independent. Even when their ideological spreads are aligned generally with a political party, young people are less likely to actually affiliate with that party. Less than a third of them say that they trust either party. That does not mean that they don't engage with party issues, party policies, or even party media. It just means that they don't particularly identify as being a Democrat and independent. And well, technically independent isn't a party, but even that is an affiliation that sometimes young people don't agree with, or Republican. So they obviously have opinions, they have issues that they care about, but they are not associating those across party lines, which, if you're old enough, actually used to be quite common in older demographics across party lines, where a specific issue wouldn't necessarily sort you into one party or another. So another thing about young people as well, and just again, a snapshot of where they are and how they're engaging, 95% of them have smartphones. So they are almost exclusively engaging with the internet, with news on the internet, on their smartphones. And so every piece of digital media that we make at Headcount is mobile forward in a very dedicated way. 9 out of 10 of them will go to a concert at least once in a year. So we know meaningfully that with our 60,000 volunteers and with our artist partners, we are meaningfully engaging most young people in America through our methods. And one that I really like to point out on this slide is that only about one in 3 of them are in college. So when folks are usually talking about young people historically, they're talking about campus programs. Campus programs are great. We also do campus programs. But if you're trying to meaningfully engage young people in 2024, most of them will not be on a college campus. And if they are, they will not be residing at their four-year institution. So even the amount of time they might spend on a campus physically is significantly diminished than it used to be. Many of them are pursuing associate degrees. Many of them are commuting into college. And so we're really our proposition of meeting young people where they're at versus trying to assume that they will all be in a dining hall on campus is more effective for our approach. And then again, about the media that they're consuming, 95% of them are on YouTube, are consuming video content on YouTube, 67% on TikTok. And in Gen Z, most of them are consuming anything that they would consider news, that is current events, content related to the news, is almost exclusively on TikTok. And so when we're thinking about the mindset of where young people are at, 48% of them don't feel safe. They report hopelessness. They feel like the promise of America is not being delivered on. The thing that I want you to hear in that, though, is that they do believe that America has a promise for good life, health, wealth, happiness, all the things that when we are sort of high-minded about what democracy is for, what it's supposed to do, and why voting is important, young people do buy into the central premise. They just believe that those things are not being redeemed. But they are not hopeless. 76% of Gen Z in particular believe that they have the power to change things, and that political action in particular can have real impact in the world. So they believe that America should exist in a certain way that involves democracy, that involves life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They believe that political change is a way to get there. So we're building a narrative here about where young people are at. There's a stat on this slide that I really like to tell people about, and it's that 54% of young people, the youngest of Gen Z, volunteer once a quarter. I don't volunteer once a quarter. That is once every 3 months. Part of that is because there has been mandatory volunteerism requirements in high schools across most of the country. But what you should also hear in that is that most of those young people will continue their volunteer opportunities or seek out new volunteer opportunities even after their requirement is not made of them, after they graduate from high school or after they leave high school for whatever reason. So we know that young people do believe as well in the central premise that doing something, being involved in something is useful. 32% of them have contacted elected officials, and 63% of them have posted on social media about a cause that they care about. So again, they are reading, they are looking, they are listening, they are posting, they are saying things, and they are willing to go out and spend quite a significant amount of time advocating for the things that they care about and the change that they want to see in the world. But not voting at rates that are as high as other age groups. And I mentioned that volunteering example and the high school requirement that sort of drives the behavior because there is no standard national civic education. And only 7 states require any kind of civic education in high school. So that is not a core part of what young people are getting, particularly as compared to other years or other past decades. And we know that only about 20% of young people without a bachelor's degree will end up voting, as opposed to about 50% of voters that get a bachelor's degree or higher. So if we know that young people, only about 1/3 of them are going to college, we know that those young people are also additionally at risk of never voting in their lifetime. So again, these are people that we need to be hitting meaningfully. And we know that there are barriers that they experience that are specific to their age group. Young people, particularly Gen Z, are going to move at least once every 18 months. So even if you were registered, you are most likely not registered at the address that you live at, whether that's on your campus, whether that's the place that you move to get a job, any of those things, including things like ID requirements, et cetera. And I'll actually skip over this slide a little bit, other than to tell you that 2020 was a record youth voter registration, record youth voter turnout. So if we are thinking about the entirety of the American experience, or we've been tracking who votes and when and why, 2020 was the highest ever. More young people than ever registering and voting. And that was a little over 50%, 52% to be exact. So even when we've done our best for young people, only a little over half of them are voting. And so that brings us to our Good to Vote campaign. So at Headcount, we are seeing those trends and we go, what does that mean for us? We've talked a little bit about our field campaigns, our in-person campaigns. We will be at over 3,000 events this year. A good number of them are behind us by September 10th. We have been out all spring, all summer, and we will be all this fall, having peer-to-peer conversations with young people about what's important to them, about why they should be voting, and getting them the vital information about getting to the ballot box. For us, we're also nonpartisan. I like to call us aggressively nonpartisan, because it is extremely important for young people who are distrustful of parties and party affiliations to know that we are a trusted source for them and that we are never going to nudge them in any particular way about how they should be voting on that ballot, but they can trust us to make sure that we are giving them valuable, accurate information about how to cast their vote. So when we're thinking about in person, most of those things are already out in the field. We've been at most of our 3,000 events so far, although we do have National Voter Registration Day next week on the 17th. It is a national civic holiday that we helped found in 2012, and that is celebrated nationally now. And so we have a bunch of big activations connected to that all across the country. But I want to tell you a little bit more about our digital program as well, which we call our Good to Vote initiative. And so what is Good to Vote? Why is it important? And Good to Vote is the most effective way for talented people to drive real turnout at scale. We know that talented people, just like all of us, they are living their lives. And then, we start to see maybe a debate like tonight, or like in June, since we had one early, and they go, oh, there's an election happening. Maybe I should do something. I'm interested in that. Maybe they'll make a PSA. PSAs do not work. We know that pretty reliably. They spark interest, they spark attention, they almost never drive meaningful action. A lot of folks will say, oh, well, I'll post a link. I'll post a link. That only works for the most popular of talented people, because those are the only people that are pushing content at a high enough scale that the conversion makes sense for people to actually get to the voting tools. And those tend to only work for people who would have already been searching for that information anyway. So if I'm a young person and I thought, oh, yeah, I think voting is good, and I see a post from somebody that says, hey, you should register to vote, that was information I was probably going to search for anyway as it got closer to election day. So I'm not a new person meaningfully engaged. I'm just getting a reminder. It's useful, but it statistically is not as useful as that person's sort of talent and reach would warrant. So if we know that PSAs aren't that useful and we know that posting links aren't that useful, that is how we landed on Good to Vote. And I do want to highlight that 54,000 slide from, actually, I'll even go back one. This is highlighting a partnership that we did with Harry Styles in 2022, where he registered 54,000 voters with our Good to Vote campaign, alongside his digital campaign and his tour that we were supporting that year. And so when we're talking again about some of the most influential people on the planet lending their voice to civic work, this is the kind of thing that we're talking about. So
Lucille, can I ask you a quick question about that?
please do.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. I find that to be really fascinating. He's British. He's
He
not an
is.
American citizen. And you also mentioned Florence Pugh,
Yes.
great actress, but also a British citizen.
Yes.
So how does that work? That's fascinating to me.
Yes, yeah, and great thing to point out, because it's something that other talent asks us as well when we're sort of talking to folks that aren't American citizens about why they should get involved. Usually, those folks are making some kind of personal narrative around the fact that they live in the United States, and so it is important to them that the place that they live is represented by somebody or even a body politic, a civic body that is active and interested. So that's one thing that our folks that aren't American citizens kind of lean into in their narratives. And also, they are invested in their fans being meaningfully engaged wherever they are. And so that is a piece of, hey, I am usually on tour if it's a musician, but Florence is an actress. And so most of her movies are being sort of shown in the United States to a US market. And so if you all are my fans and you're engaging with my content, I want you to have the opportunity to have your voice heard. And so that's usually the kinds of messaging that we support international talent with. Every once in a while, we'll have somebody who their primary market is really not the United States. Sometimes that's the case with Latin artists in particular, folks that are predominantly performing in Spanish. Their broad bases are in Central and South America. And while they might be gaining popularity in the United States and have fans in the United States, not nearly as much as in their home countries or in their home markets, those are folks to where usually it doesn't really make sense for us to do this kind of campaign with them, because it won't be put meaningfully in front of an American fan base. And so usually we'll just do something different, like in shows, for example, because then we know that the person who's interacting is somebody that actually lives in the United States because they're showing up to the show. So we'll usually do something that's more tour oriented for that kind of artist than something like a digital program. But it's a very good question. And so how does this kind of campaign work? And I'll actually go back so y'all can see a few of the ones that'll pop up on the screen there for you. Talent offer a once in a lifetime prize. So what that looks like is I am a fan of, let's say, Billie Eilish, and I am scrolling through Instagram, whatever I follow on Instagram. I do not judge anybody for whatever they follow on Instagram. And I find a post from Billie Eilish, and it says, hey, I'm offering a chance to do a meet and greet in Australia for my Australia shows. VIP tickets, meet and greet, you and a friend, check your voter registration status to enter to win. So that's how voting comes in. I have now gone from doing whatever else it was I was doing to being meaningfully engaged by something that is fan forward, right? It's that experience. It's hard to come by. Often those tickets totally sell out. So even if I did have enough money, and even if I did, could take time off of work to go there, very hard to get a hold of. And then fans check their voter registration status. You cannot incentivize voting. You cannot incentivize registering to vote. You can incentivize registration checks. So checking my status. Am I registered or am I not registered? By checking, you are entered to win this contest. Or not contest, I should say sweepstakes. And then from there, now that I've checked, maybe I notice that I'm registered at a wrong address. We can update that for you. Maybe you find that you're not registered. You can get registered at that point. Maybe I'm actually all good to go, but what I don't have is information about how to vote where I live, because maybe I've moved. And I updated my address, but I don't know, the place that I just moved to has vote by mail. And so I didn't know how I can request my ballot. Headcount will help you do that as well. And so from there, we know that fans engage and that they vote. And we do have some data to show that this is actually happening, that folks are making it all the way through the funnel. And one of the main things about why this works, again, is we are getting folks that would not be meaningfully engaged in other ways. These are not people that are already searching for voting information. These are not people that are already excited to, do something voting related. These are regular fans who most likely would not be targeted by any campaign because they are not generally the folks who already have robust voting records or that campaigns already have a ton of information about. They operate on social platforms, so they work really well. As we talked about earlier, young people are online. They're spending a ton of time online. They're spending a ton of time on social media, and this works extremely well in that format. And so we have meaningfully engaged over 1 million young people with this program over the course of the last 4 years, and over 300,000 of them have voted through this program across all of our campaigns. And so again, we know that these folks are moving through. As I mentioned earlier, 78% of all of the folks that have taken a campaign will go on and vote. So of that 1 million people that I've talked about, 78% of them have gone on to vote from 2020. We even know in the midterms that 60% of those young people ended up voting, which is an extremely high turnout rate for young people in a midterm. And we're doing it in an extremely cost-effective way. We know that we're hitting the right people. 88% of the folks that come through these campaigns are 18 to 29. And remember, we talked about how critical that age group is here. We know that most of them are women, because the platforms that we are pushing on social tend to be engaged with more by women. And also we know that, again, by genre, women tend to engage in this a bit more. We know that, again, about 1 in 3 of our folks are college educated, which matches the rough spread of young people in this age group. And we know that most of those folks are going to be describing themselves as moderate or liberal. We don't track the partisan identity or the voting track record of the folks in our network, again, because that's not the point of why we in particular exist. We just care that these folks are getting in the game. And we also know that 30% of our entries to all of these campaigns came from 1 in 12 battleground states. For headcount, we care about every single voter wherever they are in the United States, but we know that other folks are thinking about, again, how to sort of move the needle in terms of elections in certain states. And so we like to provide that information for folks as well. This is another sort of framework around our impact. We talked about the 78%, but I think what's really important about this slide is that 25% of all the people that we reached would not have voted otherwise. Again, we are not talking to people who, or I should say, we are, in addition to talking to people who had already been looking for this information anyway, we are meaningfully engaging new net voters, folks who would not have gotten, the text for donating $5 or any variety of other things. And so these are some of the ways that we have innovated the Good to Vote program this year. In addition to our field campaigns, we've also been lifting up our ambassador program. So, we've mostly been talking about the top tier talent, right? The folks who are household names, the folks who are packing stadiums. There are tiers of talented folks who have reach, particularly regional reach, very popular in their hometowns and their home states, who are maybe just starting their first national tours, who have an amazing platform, but aren't quite, the biggest stars in the world. And so finding ways to meaningfully engage them through this program, as well as increasing our ad spends to engage low access communities. So again, those folks who may not be able to afford to go to a show this year, because I don't know if you've seen, the tickets are expensive these days. And so folks that might not be able to get into a show, but who are fans of these artists and would really kind of do anything to be able to, enter to get a chance to win to see these folks. And then, of course, layering over our digital campaign with what we're doing on site. So, for an example, we are on tour with Sabrina Carpenter, or I should say we will be on tour in a couple of weeks with her. And we are also running a digital campaign with her. So she is offering for a fan and a friend to have VIP access and a meetup with her on tour. And when we are on site on tour as well, registering the folks that come through, we have that as an incentive that people can use to register on site as well. So really creating that surround sound experience with talent. So whether or not you're engaging with them online or in person, you are getting asked, are you registered to vote? Have you checked your voter registration status? And so I'll end on this note, which is just that young people really do have the power to decide 2024. 16 million of them are having the opportunity to vote in their very first presidential election. That is way beyond any sort of margin of winning or losing that anyone could be talking about this year. And so meaningfully engaging young voters, and not just for this election, but really an investment for the rest of their lives. And I will call attention to time, because it is September 10th. We have some of the first voter registration deadlines in the country in about 3 weeks. So the work that we do around registering these young people has a time limit on it. We have 3 weeks to get all these young people, particularly these young people that are not going to be engaged otherwise, into this funnel, and then getting them across the finish line to vote. So thank you so much for the time. And I think we have some time for questions.
Lucille, thank you so much. That was a lot of information to process. I do think it's really worth mentioning the fact that you are filling a void. I'm so glad that you brought up the lack of civics education that that have really permeated across the country. The United States government used to invest 54 cents per student on civics education when I was in school back when I was a kid in the 70s, and now it's down to 5 cents. So I think the fact there was a comment made about being nonpartisan, and how isn't that sort of a dangerous stance to take, especially in an election like this. But well, I'd love to have you address that, about why it's important to stay nonpartisan, even in a high stakes election like this.
Absolutely. For us, it's about what kind of messenger we are. For some people, a partisan message is really important, to be able to speak in partisan ways about why certain things are important. What we know, particularly about young people, is because they are so reluctant to engage in any kind of party affiliation, even when they have ideologies that would align in either way. If they perceive the messenger as being partisan, they perceive that messenger as having a vested interest in convincing them in one way or the other, that causes an undue reluctance or hesitancy. And so for us, nonpartisanship is what gets us to be that valuable messenger for them. Oftentimes at Headcount, we talk about being at the top of the funnel. We do engage folks who, are already thinking about choice or climate or fossil fuel use or any variety of issues, right? Sometimes we're engaging young people that already know where they stand, and they're already civically engaged with things like protesting or any other thing. Oftentimes we're engaging young people that just haven't really thought about it in terms of voting that much. And so to have us say, oh yeah, we're not here to tell you who to vote for, we're just here to give you the information that you need to be able to have your voice heard, that is the right messenger for that message. Ideally, we are able to start that young person, because we were the right messenger at the right time, on a journey that leads them to more civic engagement, more voting, more research on the issues. But if they're turned off at that critical moment by the wrong messenger, where they feel convinced or swindled or pushed, that is a turnoff that we will see ripple year over year, cycle over cycle, over the course of that voter's life. And that is how we end up with generations of voters, older millennials, Gen X, et cetera, who say, well, I don't engage with news. I don't even watch the news anymore. And again, it's that wrong messenger, wrong time. And so we try to be the right messenger for the right time. And we know that there are many other organizations that are particularly more issue focused or particularly more partisan. And absolutely the ecosystem needs them as well, the same way that the ecosystem needs us too.
Great, thank you. So to talk us through, there was a couple questions about like training volunteers and messaging. So let's say I'm going to a Sabrina Carpenter concert this fall, and how do I know that Headcount is a part of Sabrina Carpenter's world, her messaging, her whatever? Like, what does that look like if I go to a Headcount event?
Sure. I'll use two examples. Sabrina Carpenter will be one, and I'll use, actually, I might even use three very quick examples. Sabrina,
Sure.
Green Day, and Dead and Company. So at the upcoming Sabrina Carpenter tour, she, I would say, is keeping the messaging pretty straightforward. And we are following her pace in that. We will always make recommendations to talent about things like voter data, messaging, all of that. But at the end of the day, we are in the artist space. And so we are making a cohesive environment on site for folks. So what it'll look like on the Sabrina Carpenter tour is you as a fan will pass by us. We have a physical space in the venue on the way into where you're headed. We're usually right next to the merchandise table. And so we are able to meaningfully engage people on their way in. And because we have a prize that we are doing with her, we get to, chat folks up and say, hey, we're here with Sabrina. She wants to make sure that that her fans are registered to vote. Do you want to check your voter registration status to enter to win a VIP trip to see her show? And that's what that'll feel like in the moment. It's really about kind of, again, leaning with the talent, the ask all together. And we have a very short amount of time to really get folks engaged in that conversation. And that's something that we train our organizers to do, as well as our volunteers. And so they're all up to speed on how to facilitate those conversations. And once we get folks started, it's quite easy from there to talk with them about, oh, hey, where do you live? Are you, do you live in this state? Because we can also, we're trained across all 50 states and DC. And so we're able to update folks or get folks registered no matter where they live, even if they're like, across state lines to see a show. And so that's what that looks like in a Sabrina Carpenter sense around the messaging. We keep it really tight around the experience and what the prizing is. We are on tour right now with Green Day. Green Day is a band that is very vocal on a whole variety of things, including politics. And so they often are saying things from stage that are meaningful to them. Hozier is another example of an artist that we are on tour with who is very vocal on stage about the things that are important to him. Sometimes our talent will have partisan leanings. That is not where we come in. Where we come in and where the messaging that we work with talent on is around, hey, however you're going to vote, want to make sure that you have what you need to get involved. So with Green Day, we also have things like customized pins that are around their American Idiot album and tour release. So we also have a video board. So when you go into the venue, if somehow you have missed us outside, you will see on a screen at some point over the course of the show, don't be an American idiot, check your voter registration status. And so you can use a QR code to do it virtually as well as with us on site. And then you will probably hear, depending on where you're at and how Billy Armstrong is feeling that day, you will hear something from stage about why you should be engaged. And then with Dead & Company, that is one of our longest standing partners. And we're so grateful that they've been with us and that we've been able to engage their fans on tour basically every year that they've been on tour. So most recently, we were on tour with them during the residency at Sphere. And we were engaging voters as part of what we call a participation row, which is where we partner with other organizations nationally and Nevada-based. And we engage them on a variety of different actions, and checking your voter registration status is one of the actions on the participation row. So that is much more of a holistic activism sort of setup, and the messaging aligns with that. So for us, it's check your voter registration status. It's a, Dead & Company want to make sure that you're registered to vote. The next one might be sign a petition for whatever their next cause is. And so again, we keep the messaging really aligned with the sort of full experience, which in that vein is much more of a, hey, this is one of the things that you can do to like be engaged, be a good person, and Dead & Company, has invited us here, and so we're excited to engage you as a fan. And so we did that over the course of the full residency there. So that's just maybe a sampling of what that can look like.
Oh, that's great. What would Headcount do, say, if Kid Rock called you and said, hey, I want to do a voter registration, and he is, as we know, has embraced the conspiracies of MAGA? How would you handle that, Lucille?
Yeah, if that artist partner, let's say Kid Rock in particular, was meaningfully wanting to engage young people in voter registration, we would partner with that artist. Because for us, it's about making sure that young people, regardless of their persuasion, are meaningfully engaged. That being said, folks who are actively talking about spreading misinformation about election integrity, for example, those are almost never the same people that are engaging young people to register to vote. So Kid Rock has not come knocking.
Yeah.
I will say we've been
He
around for
doesn't
20
want
years.
young people to vote, actually.
Yeah, so over the past 20 years, in former versions of Kid Rock and before sort of most recent identifications, we have worked with him in the past, when he was engaging young people. And so yeah, I would again, I'll reference that kind of ideological slide that was sort of the breakdown of the young folks that we engage. Only about 8% of them would identify as being conservative, and so that is how that shakes out in terms of the young folks. We know that young folks overwhelmingly tend to be more liberal and progressive. But yeah, we work with talent, and as long as they are willing to engage young people around civic engagement and, be really honest about the information,
Yeah.
we will be there with bells and whistles on.
Yeah, that seems like a good bar to have. Like if you're telling, yeah, that's really good. Kathy Wagner wants to know, and I think most Americans would like to know, are you going to be working with Taylor Swift?
Oh man, if I had a nickel, for every time I got asked that question, and it's a great question. We are not currently working with her. In the past, she has posted tools from vote.org, who is a tool provider that does voter registration. They have a very good URL, and so it's easy for folks to use. Honestly, nobody really knows what she's doing. We have reached out to her. We were going to partner with her at certain aspects of the tour, and then she decided that she didn't want to incorporate that in tour. And so we have asked again to see if she's open to it. We have not heard a no. It is likely that she will do something. It is a bit complicated now that football season is back. And so we have learned that she is less active when that is also live in support of her partner. I think I saw briefly in the chat, somebody said Beyonce. We reached out to her team most recently, and it seems like she will be doing something. It will most likely be in the partisan space.
Yeah, that kind of makes sense. Okay, so a couple of questions around messaging and getting to those voters. Can you just sort of talk us through like how you train your volunteers, how you train, the people that are going out there and talking to young voters to sort of, it sounds like having that opportunity to like win, a special experience with Ariana Grande around Wicked, I saw on your website, or Billie Eilish, but like, how do you train these folks all over the country doing all these things?
Yeah, so we really start with our team leaders. So our team leaders are our paid organizers. We have about 165 of them across the country. And they are really sort of the masters of their domain in terms of their local communities. And we train them at least once a year, but usually a couple times throughout the year if there are legal updates in any particular state. By Annie, in any particular state on election law all across the 50 states around registration. So we make sure that they first have functional information about what the law is. When we train those organizers, those are the folks that go to the volunteers. Our volunteers, sometimes they will only volunteer with us for one show. Sometimes they will volunteer many, many times a year. Actually, I would say on average, our volunteers will will volunteer between 3 and 5 times over the course of a year, which again is quite high. It's more frequently than once a quarter in some cases. So that's that first step. What is the law? And then we talk about, honestly, quite a bit of logistics, because especially in person, we are seeing so many people. If you think of a 15,000 person arena, 20,000 person arena, and all of those folks are coming through a door where Headcount has a meaningful presence, whether that's at a table or a bunch of folks around with iPads to do things digitally. It's really about how to make that interaction really sticky. And so we train folks about a 90-second interaction. So your initial conversation with somebody, your original, you sort of, hook with somebody, it should be about 90 seconds, because that's, enough time for folks to, maybe stand there, maybe listen to what you're saying, maybe decide that they want to go to the merch table, do whatever it is that they're there for, right? And, we train folks. It's not sales. We're not selling anybody anything. We're not fundraising. We are meaningfully engaging people in our program and the thing that we exist to do. A lot of what we chat with folks about too, usually in that first interaction, if there's a prize involved, that's usually something that we'll talk about. When it's not something that's directly related to the artist, we often have things like pins that we do custom that folks can, get if they take action with us. Sometimes we don't have an incentives, and we're just, talking to folks about the mission. But it is really whatever that is, whether that's, hey, I like your jacket, or, what are you, excited to hear, the headliner play. Sometimes we'll have whiteboards where people can vote on which of the two artist albums they prefer to listen to, all those kinds of things. And it's really about kind of that first interaction. And then really it's that balance of functional information, right? Because if you do have somebody that needs to register, there's a bunch of functional information that we need from them. Their address, we need to know which state they live in, because there are various things that they might need based off of where they live. Some folks you have to register for a party affiliation so that you can vote in a primary. Some folks you don't. In some places you have to put in your driver's license number, and other places you don't, to register. So those are all things that our organizers and our volunteers are asking folks once they've started that interaction, so that they can functionally get somebody all the way through. And then usually it's just like any other interaction. We want to make sure that we're having a sort of chatty, friendly engagement. And we train all of our folks, again, to be aggressively nonpartisan. Some folks like to test us on that and say, oh, well, are you really? Or, what do you think about this? And, we, train our volunteers to have handy ways to redirect that conversation of, happy to talk to you about this after I take my shirt off, but right now I'm here with Headcount. And so we're just here to make sure that you've, got it. Because people are human, they have thoughts and opinions, but it's more about, kind of getting folks through what they need in that moment versus, being on a tangent with somebody about sort of a purity test on site. So that's usually what we're doing. When it comes to specific issues, we really have a strong frame about, if you care about it, vote about it. So, we're not here to say you should believe this or be on the side of an issue, but whatever it is that you do care about, whatever side of, any issue you're on, if you do care about it, you should vote about it. And here are all the ways that you can get involved. So that's generally how we train folks. There's a million little things beyond that, but I would say that those are the temples.
That's great. I like that. If you care about it, vote about it. Very quickly, because I know we're running out of time. So Bonnie Fuller asks sort of, since we do have these voter registration deadlines, I know Arizona, Nevada, and I think Georgia maybe, since we have these deadlines coming up, are you focused on the early deadline states, and then you're going to keep moving to broaden your focus, or how are you handling that, Lucille? Or are you just dependent on where these artists are and
Yeah,
what
that's a
they're
great
doing?
question. And the question is yes to all, or the answer is yes to all of that. So
Okay.
when we are touring, we are along the artist tour route. So we're really subject to what their route is there. And so there are times where, an artist will have a performance in a state where the voter registration deadline has already passed. And so we will either let folks know, hey, you can register today, but you won't be eligible for the November election. You'll be eligible for your next local election, because we don't just activate in presidential years, we activate every single year around local elections as well. So that's one thing that sometimes we'll do. Or we will switch to a get out the vote flow. So, hey, it's too late to register for November, but do you want to send, like, if you send your friends, this link so that they get registered, you can enter to win. And, then those folks are getting engaged wherever they live. So that's another option. For our digital campaigns, we run those nationally as well, because they're, anybody across the country that is eligible can enter. So that continues to be national. And then we phase out those campaigns as the deadlines come through. And then we also layer additional advertising to places where we know that deadlines are coming up. So we'll have, for example, we have that Ariana Grande campaign that you mentioned, Kitty, where she is offering a red carpet experience to a red carpet experience for the premiere of the movie Wicked she's in. As we start getting to specific state deadlines, we'll target specific ads in places where we know the deadlines are coming up, so they have the opportunity to do that. We also have a generic, I should say, get out the vote campaign. So not related to an artist, not related to a specific prize. It's really just, hey, headcount, deadlines are coming, all that stuff. And so those are additional ones that we have targeted by state as the deadlines come through. Quite a few states have same-day voter registration. So in a decent number of places all across the country, we are doing that work sort of right up until and through election day. And then we also have organic ways that we do get out the vote too, some of which I mentioned in the presentation around texting, emailing, all those things are organic. We have about a 2 million person email list. And I want to say we have over 400,000 folks in our text list. Again, we don't fundraise through those portals. So they are really just us activating young people. And so we have really high sort of open and engagement rates because they know that we're not going to like spam them a ton about things that they don't really want to engage with.
Right, right. A couple, so in just to wrap out a state focus, there's one of our attendees, Rachel, was in Philadelphia registering people at Temple University last week, which is great, Rachel. Thank you for that. What's going on? What is Headcount going to be doing in Pennsylvania? She did ask specifically about Temple, but let's talk about the whole state. Is there a way that we can find out what you're doing in Pennsylvania, and can people who are living there sort of volunteer with Headcount and get involved?
Yeah, so if you are interested by state, what I will do is pass along the sort of list that we have for folks, and it's every single in-person activation that we have going through election season, and you can sort by state or by kind of activation. Most of them will be music related, although we do have some other things that are not directly music related. I'm pretty sure we are not activating at Temple. We do have our college program, but we are mostly focused on, and I should say not, but we are focused on there in Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Arizona, and Michigan, but not at Temple. I believe in those states we are in significantly larger schools. And so not at Temple, but lots of other folks, lots of other places. And especially if you're a music fan, we will have a variety of things across the Pennsylvania area. So I will make sure that y'all get the link. I will say that we are quite rigorous with our volunteer pool. So if there's something that you see there that you would like to do, sign up as soon as possible. And the team leader will, as the day approaches, come through and make selections. We do have a preference for folks that have volunteered more frequently with us. And so I just like to let folks know if it's something that's extremely popular. We have folks who sometimes won't volunteer unless it's a super, super popular show, and then they get bummed because like, you know, they can't table the Olivia Rodrigo show. So if it's a super, super popular show, we'll usually give a preference to folks that have volunteered with us before. But if it's something that's pretty regular, it's usually easy to get on a volunteer team. And yeah, get involved. We've got lots of stuff going, especially in the last, well, I guess we've got probably 6 weeks worth of events. And then of course through deadlines. So
We'll be sure to put that link in the recap email, everyone, just so you have it. So Barbara Spitz wanted to know best way to support you now, donation or volunteering, and what do you need right now, just in terms of getting all these programs over the finish line? You're reaching a lot of young Americans. So what's the best way to help you right now, Lucille?
yes, I will give 2 answers to that question. Right now, a donation would be most effective. So as I mentioned to you, we are doing a lot of our local focus through ads. We are, of course, doing a ton of things on site, but we've largely fundraised for those activities earlier in the year because they are very difficult to scale at this late in the game. So when we're talking about fundraising, most of it is going toward digital. So it is making sure that young people are getting something in their feeds around voting, registering and voting over the next 6 weeks. I will say though, if you're thinking about volunteering, of course, we would love to have you. But I would say think about volunteering next year, particularly starting in January. People forget about voting when it's not a presidential year. And so we do this work all of the time. We are the folks that are thinking in February of 2025, how do we get young people to vote in their local sheriff's race or in their local congressional race or whatever that looks like, even in an odd year. And so right now it's money, but in 2025, it will absolutely be volunteering.
So it makes me feel better, Lucille, that you don't take your foot off the gas at all.
No, never. And honestly, we find that young people are extremely activated around when we talk to them around local elections because we get to tell them, hey, these races are sometimes decided by 10, 50, 1,000 votes. And short, like if you feel like your vote gets lost in a presidential election, okay, well, here's your chance. If you want to talk about school board, here, we're in it with you. And we do that work all the time. And, you know, we're, you know, in on tours still. We still actually do a ton of community events in odd years as well. So places like the New York City Marathon and things like that. Those are places that we activate every single year. So we are just as busy. No, maybe not just as busy. We are quite busy in an odd year, the same way that we are in an election year as well. So the work does not stop.
Thank you so much, Lucille, for coming to Big Tent. I'm really going to be saying this a lot. If you care about it, vote about it. I think that really expresses it all. And I appreciate everyone coming to Big Tent. We are down to the last 56 days. Let's all support our fellow Americans, write letters, text bank, phone bank, go knock on doors. We need to really help people get out and make sure that their voice is heard. And Lucille will be tracking headcount and all your great work. And we just appreciate you taking the time to come to Big Tent today. So thank you.